So I wanted to introduce, that was a pretty amazing keynote presentation also by the Dean. It was great to have him speak about Latino students and immigration on an international, broader international scale. So I'm glad there were so many of you that were able to join us there. What we'd like to do is move into our third panel of the day, and this panel is focused on models for equity in undergraduate education. And we are lucky to have three amazing presenters today to share some of the work that they've been doing related to this topic. Our first presenter will be Enrique Campos, and he is the Undocumented Student Program Coordinator here at the UCLA Bruin Resource Center, and his presentation will be supporting undocumented Latino students at UCLA. Next, we have Dr. Dolores Delgado Bernal, who is Professor of Education and Ethnic Studies at the University of Utah, and her presentation will be on lessons learned from a university-school community partnership. And finally, we have Dr. Sylvia Hurtado, who is the Head of Higher Education and Organizational Change Division, and also Professor of Education here at the UCLA GSEIS. And her presentation is Trends in Campus Climate for Latino college students. So we will start first with Enrique Campos.
Hello everyone. How's everyone doing? Good? So again, my name is Enrique Campos and I'm the program coordinator for the Undocumented Student Program here at UCLA. And I'm really excited to be able to talk to you all about like the program and the work that I've been doing in the last 2 years here at UCLA. So to just kind of start us off, I want to state the mission for the program. And so basically, we want to offer a space for students and be able to offer our services through a caring and personalized support for students. And so we want to make sure that students have a safe space that they can come to and ask questions and get information that they need to be able to navigate the institution here. And so, again, we work primarily with undergraduate students here, but there's also graduate students that we continue to support as well because we understand that they also have needs, right? And so it's really important that we consider our graduate students as well. So again, we want to provide that safe space because students are always coming to us letting us know that they feel like they're the only ones on campus and they feel isolated being in this campus, and it's a huge campus. Even though we are the smallest campus in terms of, I guess geographically, we are the largest in population, and so it tends to feel like alone. And so, and especially having a status where students are undocumented, it also adds more pressure and more stress because they feel that they can't tell anyone they're undocumented until they start meeting other people that are in their same situation or that they can relate to, right? And so again, we wanna be able to provide campus awareness on here, and we do that through ally trainings, and we do that through to trainings to departments on campus. The other thing is that we want to make sure that, again, to be able to get students to not feel isolated on campus, to foster a sense of belonging. It's really important for our students to know that they do belong in this university and they do belong in higher education, right? And so we also do a lot of community building, and this is something that's really important, and I'll touch base on the different things that we do to provide this space and continue to build community amongst undocumented students and the allies that students do come across. And so, and just finishing up with the mission, we do value and understand that the experiences of undocumented students are different, but that's not to say that they're not important, right? And we want to make sure that students are visible and feel visible here in the campus. And so, their experiences are valuable, and their experiences have been invisible for a long period of time. And so, but things have been changing, and we want to make sure that the whole campus as a whole is aware and knows how to work with undocumented students. And so, so in that, we also want to make sure that through our work and through our programming, we enhance those the students' personal and academic endeavors, and we do that by by valuing their contributions to the university. And so some of the, I guess when this year, as we were starting to think about what we wanted to do and what the goal for the program was going to be, we wanted to make sure that we worked around a goal. One goal specifically to be able to address the needs of students, and the goal is to address students' wellness, and wellness is huge. It's a huge goal because it encompasses a lot of things that students go through, and that students need to be able to get, I guess, this holistic approach of being able to address their needs. And so the goal is to be able to get to get the students to a stage of wellness, overall wellness, and that includes mental health, academic, personal, and everything else that comes with that. And so, again, a lot of our students, it's changing. A lot of the students used to be commuter students in the past, and it's changing to students having access to living in the dorms or living close to campus because there's financial aid. But despite having financial aid or access to financial aid, there's still a large population of students that do not qualify for that. And so in doing this work, it's really important for us to consider those students that are not eligible for financial aid through the California DREAM Act. And so how do we continue to support these students, or how do we continue to be advocates for the students to make sure that they stay here and that they are retained and they eventually graduate, right? And not just graduate, but graduate with a high performance, and also be able to graduate to continue either their studies or go into the workforce, whatever their choice is. Just in terms of data, I know the past presenters have talked about data, and so in terms of enrollment here, we have about 45% Latino students, and so it's a mix of 45% Latino, Latina, and then we have about 45% API as well, and then the rest comes from everywhere else in the world. And so it's really important for us to consider this as we do our work, because we need to consider the experiences of other students and what they bring to the institution. Recently, we were doing a focus group, and this is to understand the students' needs. And so some of the things that are really important and that we were able to get through the focus group, through questions asking about campus climate and what were the barriers here at UCLA. What the students were telling us is that they appreciate having a mentorship, and the mentorship really changes the dynamics of how they navigate the institution. And so we want to create programming, or continue to create programming that's going to address some of the needs that I'm going to talk about. And so they want to see more faculty awareness, especially in the sciences. Something that came up was that a lot of faculty, especially here at UCLA, tend to be more aware in the social sciences and humanities, but not in the STEM field, which is something that we need to tackle. And we've tried that in the past, and it's been a challenge. But I think it's something that we continue to think about and think in different ways to make sure that we do address this. Again, the invisibility, going to more visibility where students are able to say that they're undocumented, and not just say it, but feel proud about their identity and how that shapes who they are and how they navigate the institution. The other thing is that financial aid, of course, as students navigate, it's something that they are always constantly thinking of. And so that is, again, we create programming to make sure that we address those needs, right? And so that's something that we also consider. And in terms of students deciding to come to UCLA, they mentioned that, a lot of the students mentioned that outreach programming was something that they felt was really important before they decided to come to UCLA. So outreach presentations that they came to before accepting UCLA, made them change their decision, even though they got accepted to Berkeley or to other UCs and so, or Cal States. But having somebody there to let them know that they had support was really important in making that decision that was going to change how they continue their studies. One thing that I wanted to mention was that a lot of students, it was not interesting, and because through practice, I've noticed a lot of students do feel, in a way, proud and know that their identity has shaped who they are. But something that they shared with us was that they, despite the challenges, they felt proud and they wouldn't change the fact that they're undocumented, based on the experiences that they've had and how that identity has shaped who they are and how they navigate at UCLA. And so that was really interesting to see. And so, yeah, so that's something that I wanted to mention. If I go back to what we do offer for students, it's we do advising. Again, like I said, one-on-one. We do a lot of advocacy to make sure that students get the support that they need from the different departments. Even though we're the resource center, we don't have control over financial aid or counseling or all the other things that are going to make their experience here effective or enhance their experience. We make sure that we work with those departments to make sure that their needs are addressed. We connect students to those departments. We do, again, UCLA trainings to make sure that faculty and staff are aware and know how to work with students and offer those services that they need. Building community, and then policy, understanding policy. So we do a lot of the breakdown of policy to make sure that everyone has at least a base understanding of what it means to be AB 540 or what it means to get California Dream Act or financial aid through the California Dream Act, what deferred action means, and so be able to break those down for faculty and staff that may want to hire a student if they have DACA, for example, and how does that work? How does that process work? And building knowledge. And just to let, I know we have a time crunch, but some of the services that we offer is the Mariposa Achievement Project, and this is basically coming out. Oh, okay. This is coming out of something that students prioritize. We had a survey that went out to students, and we wanted to see what they were thinking were the essential needs to be able to succeed here at UCLA. And the three main things that came out of that survey were textbooks, because they're expensive, and they wanted to have access to textbooks. Transportation, again, because a lot of the students are commuters, and then being able to have access to food, as food insecurity is a really big issue around colleges. And so, so as we were thinking of ways that we wanted to address those needs, we created this Mariposa Achievement Project, which essentially created a textbook lending library. And so we have a running library throughout the year where we purchase books for students, and then they just borrow them for the quarter. And just to add a note, the first time that we started, the first quarter that we started this program, and the students returned their books at the end of the quarter. One student that stood out was mentioning that this is the first time that she had ever gotten an A or A's in all of her classes, because this was the first time she had ever had access to a textbook. And so that really made a difference in how she navigated or was able to get good grades in her classes. It wasn't that she didn't want to get those grades, but she didn't have access to the essential textbook to be able to get her homework done on a regular basis. Transportation was, again, a big issue for commuter students, and so we created a program where we do stipends for students. And so what that looks like is students have to make those arrangements, their either their parking pass or their public transportation arrangement, but we provide funds for them to be able to get either their parking pass or their public transportation. And so to be able to get them to campus more easily. And again, the last one was like food insecurity, so providing meal vouchers for students so that they can go to so they can go eat and be able to focus as they study. And so the other thing that came out of our program was, because students do commute, is we started offering napping sessions. And this was to address the need of lack of sleep and lack of being able to study or function, because students are commuting, or we know a lot of students that were commuting 3 hours one way on public transportation, and so they had to leave at like 6 in the morning or even before to be able to get to campus by 8 or 9 when they had class. And so not having enough sleep also played a role in how they perform. And so we created this napping sessions to be able to have a space where they can just rest for a little bit and be able to continue studying and be successful. So in terms of going back to like the reason why we selected the name for the Mariposa Achievement Project, again, we don't have a lot of the resources or enough resources to be able to provide everything for the students, especially in terms of financial. But we do know, as I mentioned with the student that was able to get straight A's in her classes, is that we use the mariposa, or the butterfly, as in thinking of the butterfly effect. And so I'll just leave it off with that. And it basically means that a small change at one place in a complex system can have large effects elsewhere. And so that's how we approach. And of course, the complex system is the institution, or navigating the institution.
I want to start with thanking Lindsay and Carlos and Danny for invitation to be here, but really I guess the invitation for all of us to bring such a group of scholars and educators, students, activists together to let us think together. Hopefully people are staying for the reception so we can talk and share ideas. There's a lot of lessons from a K-16 partnership that I co-founded over a decade ago. And the lessons both come from our successes and from our failures. We've really tried to learn from both of those. What I'm going to do today, given the limited time we have and also the focus of this panel on undergraduate programs, is talk just about the undergraduate component of this K-16 pipeline. I'll tell you the takeaway I want you to have, and that's the focus, is I want to leave you with the idea that as we tend to the intellectual and academic development of undergraduate students, and it's really what Enrique and a number of the other panelists today have talked about, is the idea that we need to simultaneously tend to their ability to thrive in very often a racial climate that's hostile, to be able to actually take their different marginalized identities and use those to thrive. So that's kind of my takeaway. This is a visual of that K-16 pipeline that I mentioned. It's very, very busy, and I only show you the whole thing because I'm not going to talk about the K-16 Adelante, the middle school Alas, or the Mestizo Arts and Activism, which is the high school component. The reason I show it to you, though, is because the undergraduate students I'm going to talk about in that program that they're in, they all do community engagement in these Latino communities. They all do their service learning there. So I'll blank all that out, and really down here on the bottom is what I want you to focus on, and it's the Diversity Scholars. What is the Diversity Scholars? It is a cohort model freshman retention program that is offering support to students in their first year on campus at the University of Utah, where I'm at. But importantly, I want to point out that it's not a remedial program, and it is not classified as an orientation program. Rather, the way it's been developed as this first year cohort model is a academically rigorous program, and what I often call a third space. kind of a borderland space where Latina students are able to really study issues of power, of privilege, of patriarchy, of race. And they do get support. So I'll talk about that course in a minute and that kind of content. They get support through things like a summer orientation program, regular interaction with faculty of color. They have staff of color who are giving them academic support. There's mentoring and study groups that are set up. They have, the core of it is this ethnic studies year-long course. Actually, it's 2 courses that they're in, they enroll in. Their service placement is the whole year. So for 1 whole year, they're working in a Latino community, most of them. A few of them go into other service learning, but most of them are in these other 3 sites that I'm not actually talking about. And that becomes the core of that class. I want to back up though and give you the context, because it is at the University of Utah. Like some of you, maybe coming from a research intensive university, about 30,000 students. But unlike many of you, it's a predominantly white campus. It is predominantly white staff and faculty. And so that's a Utah context. I know in the next panel, Dr. Villalpando is actually going to talk about some of those institutional components that have to be in place, whatever the institution is that you're at, to develop these kind of undergraduate programs. He was actually the Associate Vice President of Equity and Diversity and had the vision for this diversity scholars program. And whatever kind of program we're doing on campuses, we need to think about how does empirical data or how does the literature inform it? And so there's at least 3 bodies of literature that informed how we move forward. One of them is informed by our colega, Dr. Hurtado, and other colleagues in higher ed, but it's basically the idea that frequent interaction across racial lines, these kinds of interracial dialogues have positive outcomes. Whether it is persistence in school, cognitive development, there's positive outcomes. Now, most of this research actually looks at when white students are a part of that dialogue. In our case, there aren't white students. It's interracial with Latino students and African American students, Pacific Islander students, Asian American students. So that's where those interracial dialogues take place. Another body of literature that informs it goes back to the 1970s, and it's basically the idea that undergraduate students who actively engage in community-based participatory education usually feel they're more engaged, and so they feel they belong and they persist. Again, most of this literature is a little different from what we're doing because a lot of this literature looks at more of a assimilationist perspective. Assimilationist, I mean, in assimilating into the university campus. And really what we're doing with this program at the University of Utah is we're trying to look at the Diversity Scholars Program as providing a classroom space as well as off-campus space, because they're out doing that service learning, where students participate in communities of origin as a way of helping them feel they belong on a predominantly white campus, which some would say is counterintuitive, but it really isn't from what we're seeing. And the third one is the idea of service learning is identified as one of those high impact types of programs that lead to deep learning. And in the case with the students, the undergraduate students are doing what we call, in the literature, is called critical service learning. Different than service learning that is kind of that missionary approach. You're going in to save a community, right? Critical in that there's a lot of reflection, reciprocity, and the idea of transformation. And a lot of that reflection is done through written as well as digital reflections that the students do as they gain a discourse to kind of look at society, look at patriarchy, look at racism, sexism, and they reflect in that way. So this is the literature that informs it. I want to talk about the official objectives of the course. Dr. Enrique Aleman, he's now chair at educational leadership in University of Texas, San Antonio. He and I developed the course about 8 years ago. It's housed in ethnic studies, but really it is a critical race studies course for undergraduates. And to date, about 12 different faculty have co-taught this course, but the core of it is still there. And some of those official objectives that show up on the syllabus are things like the idea that students will be able to articulate an understanding of whiteness, of microaggressions, of patriarchy, those kinds of ideas, and then apply them to their own educational experiences, but also to others' educational experiences and to this idea of educational equity, inequity. Another objective, official objective, is the idea to be able to engage in cross-racial ethnic dialogues in this classroom about these kinds of concepts, including activism. What does it mean to be active? What does it mean to engage in transformation? And then finally, another kind of official objective is the idea to make connections between theory and practice and engage in critical service learning in a Latina community or in another community of color, and bring those reflections in, bring those discourses to the forefront. The course is very informed by critical race theory, and what I mean by that is earlier one of the panelists put up critical race pedagogy. And in fact, we've talked over and over, Dr. Aleman and I, as we developed this course, it really was this kind of critical race feminista pedagogy that was involved. And so what I mean by that, if you think of one of the basic assumptions of critical race theory is valuing experiential knowledge. That shaped the way we did assignments, the way we did different activities in class, tests, projects, shaped by a lot of the underlying assumptions of critical race theory, and really Chicana feminism was infused in that. And so it shaped the course at the same time that it was also a lot of the readings that the students were engaged in. The course is labor intensive. It is co-taught, so let's say we had 120 students in the class. It actually got broken down into 4 sections, 30 students in a section, and faculty co-taught on the same syllabus, the same time on campus. But students would come together several times in an auditorium for projects, films, different things, instead of going to their smaller class. And so they felt they were a part of something bigger. They came together for these kinds of dialogues. Now, I said these were the official objectives. I guess the unofficial or the goal that many of us have is the idea is really that it's to politicize these students in a way that will allow them to actually gain strength from their different marginalized identities, and then use that strength to negotiate a campus climate, to negotiate their educational journey, and eventually transform that. So pretty big, you could see why it doesn't go on the syllabus, right? It's what we're hoping for, but not necessarily one of those measurable outcomes at the end of the semester. Real quickly, who are the diversity scholars? Since 2007, there's been nearly 1,000 students, freshmen students of color. Of those students, over 60% are Latino students. This next largest group is Asian American and Pacific Islander, then mixed race students, African American, American Indian students. 64% were sponsored students, 36% were merit-based scholarship students. And what that means is that it's mixed ability grouping. So 64% of the students did not meet minimum eligibility requirements to get into University of Utah, a research-intensive university. They were sponsored by Center for Ethnic Student Affairs. So theoretically, according to our admissions office, and I know to many of the admissions offices on your campuses, these students should not be on campus. In a moment, you'll see when I show you that most of them are actually thriving, persisting, and graduating. And so definitely a mixed ability grouping that comes together with this group of students. 65% are first generation college students, 60% are bilingual, but a number of those are actually trilingual. And then approximately 6 to 8% are undocumented students, and we are an in-state tuition state. So what are the outcomes from the Diversity Scholars class? Let me speak real briefly to both quantitative and qualitative findings that we've written about. One is the finding that there is increased persistence and graduation rates for Latinas and Latinos and other students of color. Now, when we break that down by gender and by different racial ethnic groups, there are differences. But for example, if we break down by gender, our young women are graduating, persisting and graduating at higher rates than our young men of color, and that parallels the national norm. But overall, what we're seeing is across the board, there is increased persistence and graduation rates. The other thing is the idea that's exciting to my research is around shifting subjectivities and critical consciousness. So we've done a lot of interviews with these students over the years, focus groups, and looked at the digital and written reflections, and looked at how students talk about their critical consciousness, how they have their identities have shifted since when they were growing up, particularly around and growing up in a place like Utah where you may be the only one. And so how they've changed and thought about their identities in different ways. And then the idea of social connectedness and a sense of belonging, how being in a space of community of color, both in the class and in the community, has made them feel they belong and are leaders, actually leaders on campus. And then the ability to talk back to racism, sexism, heteronormativity, this ability, they have these new tools that allow them to talk back. And when they say they talk back, some of them say they talk back in other classes. Maybe they'll use the concepts in a paper. But some of them talk back in their everyday interactions, and a number of them said in their homes. They go back home and they're kind of be able to use the language to talk to mom, dad, siblings about thinking about these kinds of things differently. So what I'd like to do is actually, it's a 3-minute video. I just want to share, it talks a little bit about the program and it gives you a snapshot of some of the students who have gone through the program. It calls them the CSRC scholars because this film was made in the early years before we changed it to the diversity scholars. And then I think a couple of the undergraduates actually talk about mentoring with Adelante. That was that K-6 component on that pipeline, so that's what they're referring to.
Hurtado, can I ask you to read?
Students that are now sophomores and juniors talk about how the course, as well as the service learning, gave them a sense of belonging on a predominantly white campus. They're doing service learning in an elementary school that's ethnically, racially diverse. Some of them have come from, some of the university students have come from communities very similar to where this school, elementary school community. And so it has given them an opportunity to be involved in the community, but by doing that, they're a representative of the university and they feel they belong to the university.
It just pushes me along, keep pushing me forward towards my academic. So I want to keep succeeding as a Latino and saying I can do it as a Latino.
It lets me see a bigger perspective of what's out there. And I wrote in one of my reflections that this service learning has taught me to see myself more than just a college student.
I think the class and the program really allows them to find a connection with advisors that really can understand their experiences and help them work through some of the issues they might have as freshmen.
So Adelante is a separate program from the CSRC Scholars Program, but they've created a nice partnership. Adelante is a college awareness and partnership between the University of Utah and Jackson Elementary School. And it is about creating networks and college awareness in a community that has been underrepresented in higher education. And the students also, Adelante students also visit the university on trips, science camp, and so they see their mentors here sometimes, they interact on campus. But what's key is that the university comes to them via the university students.
Being part of everything together really is important because when I go mentor at the elementary school, I give a chance to the students to have somebody also support them and be a good role model. And I always have students ask me questions about school, which is really great because then I know that I'm making a big impact on their decision and their course of going into school. I know some of the challenges they will face, and I think that by forming this strong connection with them, they are going to see that it is possible to overcome those challenges. It tells a lot about what the campus really values. It values a lot of, they want a lot of different cultures coming in. They care about diversity here, and they care about kids that need a little bit more support and a push to come to school. So I think what what they're doing here is really great.
As a first-year program and being a cohort model, it's key to the university to invest in these young people, and it's an investment for the university to be a part of this program, to put energy, resources, faculty into the CSRC Scholars Program.
We're actually, as a university, living up to one of our goals, or one aspect of the mission, which is to serve all, and to make sure that the university, that the state's flagship institution, is serving multiple communities and providing opportunities for students to persist all the way through.
Thanks. I'm going to stop right there.
Good afternoon, and thanks for sticking with us through all of this. I want to say that my presentation is going to tie a little bit from the morning and actually prefigure some of the discussion we'll have in the afternoon in the next session. But I thought I would really show you a couple of things. My work has been focused on campus climate for a very long time, and I really didn't think of it as having any policy implications except for improving the experiences of underrepresented groups, and particularly of Latinos across the country. So I want to say something about what I'll present today, some information that's hot off the press. I'll give you some references and resources in the last slide, so if you want to look up some of this stuff and have it, you can. But the first thing I want to do is kind of give you an update on campus climate issues. And part of this analysis was conducted for the Fisher versus University of Texas Supreme Court case that's coming up back again to the Supreme Court. So once again, discussions of actually using race and ethnicity as part of one of many factors is coming back to the Supreme Court. So stay tuned for that to find out. So I'm going to use some of the information, and I want to say something that probably not a lot of people know, but for almost all these Supreme Court cases on affirmative action, data on Latinos have been used to support continuing for open access, and to also really give more insight into the particulars of Latino college students as they're experiencing college. In this particular case, what makes the Fisher case distinct is the conversation is also turned to climate as a way to think. You need to have sufficient numbers so you actually have a very conducive climate. So I'm going to show a little bit of that, and this actually is submitted in the amicus brief from the social scientists that came together for this next set of cases, and we had to file this at the beginning of November, so I said it really is hot off the press. So I'm going to show some data from the last 5 years to summarize some of the climate issues. The other thing that I think we did differently in this case slightly is, and I'm going to show you some results, is we want to talk about some of the consequences and causes of climate issues for Latinos. And I think that's been the basis of my work for many years, but I'm going to point out a couple of things that kind of connect with policy now. And then the last thing I want to say is that I want to refocus by looking at some of the new data, and my book just came out. I forgot my little flyer up there, but anyway. And on Mexican Americans, and it's K through 12 college and beyond, and it just came out by University of Texas Press. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of some insight from that, findings from that book that relate to climate. We have both quantitative and qualitative data on different stages of Mexican American educational journey, and I hope you'll take a look at that. But I'm going to give you just some insights from that, and then talk about some implications that will help in the next conversation as well. So let me start with just some of the typical things regarding climate. Now, most campuses don't know what's going on unless there's a report, right? So we asked students in the Diverse Learning Environment Survey, this is about 52 campuses, to find out to what extent do they report, did they experience discrimination, and did they report it to a campus authority? Well, the proportion of students who report is really not that large. So initially you might look at this and it's like, well, okay, it's higher among African Americans. It seems it's there for Latinos, but it's not as much. And what we actually see that in the least diverse campuses, there are actually more reports. In the most diverse campuses, those with over 36% underrepresented minorities, a lot of which are Hispanic serving institutions, there's fewer reports. So one thing that we say is when representation increases, you have fewer problems. Now, it doesn't mean the problems go away, because I'm going to show you something in a minute. But it really says that you could have probably more conducive climates when you actually have representation. So this actually looks at then, well, not the reporting. What if we ask questions about feelings of exclusion, the frequency with which they hear verbal comments that are stereotypical, or they see offensive visual images that relates to a whole number of things. And you can go on the web for a minute. I teach a dialogue class, and students actually come up, when you look at forms of oppression, in 5 minutes they can come up with 100 things that really are shocking in terms of what's out there on the web and how people are talking about Latinos. So this basically shows that, again, as the campus becomes more diverse, there are fewer incidences of exclusion and verbal comments and facial images. So the pattern is the same. The more representation, the less discrimination and bias you have. Now, again, even at the most diverse campuses, it doesn't go away. We're still learning how to get along with each other, right? Okay, but what this shows is the reports that actually happen. The reports that campuses actually have to deal with are so few. But a lot of it is happening in more subtle ways, and it's happening on a daily basis to students. So this actually informs the current Fisher case in terms of saying when the numbers drop, you have more discrimination, and you actually have probably more incidents on campus as a result of that. And so UCLA is one example where that happens. So the next question we asked was, my earlier work actually looked at the relationship among Latinos, and particularly high achieving students, the relationship between discrimination that they experienced and their sense of belonging. We know it's a negative effect. This basically shows also the differences between those campuses with the lowest amount of diversity, medium amount of diversity, and high amount of diversity, but the relationship between discrimination and sense of belonging. So if there was no relationship between being discriminated against or biased against and sense of belonging, it would be zero. So you see we are far below zero. It's a negative effect. And it's more strongly, the correlation between discrimination and sense of belonging is highest, and that is negative, at the lowest diverse institutions. So this notion of isolation, of difficulty gets compounded when there are fewer of other Latino students on campus, but we also find that actually it improves as campuses get more diverse. Now, currently where the Supreme Court case is focused on the University of Texas, they're at the medium diverse institutions. They're about 22% underrepresented groups. So if they were to drop, they would see much more discrimination happening and also reports. So this actually tells us some relationship. Now we know there's a slightly different pattern for African American students, but for Latinos, this has been pretty standard across a lot of years that we've done this data. So now I'm going to turn to really some key factors about, and particularly focusing on the book. In chapter 8, we focus particularly on Mexican Americans. Now, the book we decided to focus on Mexican Americans because whenever Latinos are aggregated, actually we underestimate how some of the problems that are affecting particular groups, particularly the largest Latino group, Mexican Americans, and their attainment rates are lower than every single other Latino group. Not just counting other ethnic groups. So we actually have a focus on the book saying we need to disaggregate the data so we can actually understand what's happening with this particular population and others, but you don't unless we do that. So what we try to do in the book was get researchers that have been writing on Latinos to start disaggregating the data so that you learn more about the different groups, and particularly Mexican Americans, where we think some of these policy issues have had a major impact. So what we found in looking at predicting, we wanted to predict, what predicts discrimination and harassment for students. And those things that students who were higher on perceptions of discrimination and harassment were students who also reported financial concerns. So there's a compounding effect occurring here, is that they are not only more vulnerable to being attacked for their own ethnicity, but also that's compounded by the financial concerns that they have. So we really see these issues. Now, by the way, we didn't see any income differences. That is, students, Mexican Americans from higher income and also lower income, were experiencing equal amounts of discrimination and harassment. But when it came to financial concerns, that was a key predictive issue. The other thing is we know that there's certain things that actually get people more resistant and resilient, and that's participating in a number of things where they're able to call it out more, right? So in the surveys, they do call it out more. Students who joined a political student organization and those who attended co-curricular diversity activities, and there was a whole range of them, including use of ethnic cultural centers as well as ethnic studies. So they actually are then able to see this in the environment when in the past they may not. We did actually see a difference between more recent immigrants and those who were first generation in the country. They were less likely to report discrimination and bias, surprisingly, or at least they didn't want to call it out in the survey. So one of the things that lower, students who see less of this or actually minimize the effect of discrimination and harassment is one, students who felt that they had become academically validated as students in the classroom. That is, this kind of relates to the notions that Laura Rondon pulled out very earlier, particularly looking at community college students. I'm going to show some relationship with that. That really the extent to which students feel validated, and if students are working or they're attending they're commuting, etc., they're not spending a lot of time on campus, that classroom environment becomes very important. We also saw women were more likely, Mexican-American men reported higher discrimination and harassment rates than women, surprisingly. Those students who actually had the personal goal of promoting racial understanding saw lower harassment, which is the harassment, by the way, is a more overt and actually criminally punishable form because it's threats, it's via email, personal threats, physical violence, that kind of thing. So it's rarer, harassment is rarer, and as actually punishable, it's these more subtle forms that are not punishable. And then we saw students who actually experienced diversity in the curriculum, and we looked at a range of things, including participation in service learning, readings about women, readings about racial ethnic groups, and also opportunities for dialogue in the classroom. That was our diversity in the curriculum, or what we call the inclusive curriculum. There were lower forms of harassment being reported. Now, they might be overall because the campus is doing this, that actually they're educating so that students are not, these experiences are not happening on campus, but students are not reporting them either. So there are things that can be done. Now, let me just talk quickly about academic validation in the classroom. This is our factor we have in the diverse learning environment surveying. So we asked students questions about how frequently they felt the instructors provided them with feedback to help them judge progress. They felt their contributions were valued in class. Instructors were able to determine their level of understanding of course material, or encourage them to ask questions and participate in class discussions. So this is a notion of really kind of building an inclusive classroom and thinking about ways to engage students and get them to enjoy learning, and also help them to develop an identity as a student. So what we found is the academic validation for Mexican Americans varied by institution type. It was highest in community colleges, next highest in four-year colleges, and very low in universities. So students are getting a great deal of academic validation in the community colleges, presumably because some of those classes are smaller. It's a teaching institution. There's a whole range of things happening. So every time we survey community college students, they always come out much higher than students at other types of four-year institutions. And partially because, hey, we just want to pack them in, warm the seat, and that's it. But really, we need to really give students that holistic approach in terms of understanding and helping them to be successful. So what are the policy implications? I think one of the things that critics might say if they look at the climate data, and they'll say, oh, well, why don't Latinos just go to other campuses where there are lots of Latinos, right? Very simple. Well, we're already crowded in community colleges, right? And then if you look at Hispanic serving institutions, which are growing in number, but the ones who historically have spent a lot of time working with Latino students, they don't have the resources. They don't have the same resources, right? So we can't expect only certain colleges in America to educate Latinos or African Americans. They really need to be citizens, and they need to have a sense of belonging at all types of institutions. So for me, the only solution is to improve the climate at whatever campus accepts a Latino student. We really need to improve the climate at every campus. So, but let's just say they could easily take my data and say, oh, well, maybe they should just go there. And so what I'm saying is we already know there's a lot of segregation in higher education, right? And that's occurring. So we really need to kind of move from that kind of a policy to another. So one of the things is the data begin to show, you can minimize bias through increased representation, right? So you can have more peer groups, you can have more interest groups, you can help support each other in developing your identity as you move through college. But the other important thing that we have to do is we have to educate all students to increase their awareness about what bias is, to improve tolerance. We also want students to be resilient in these environments, and we also want to encourage the development of diversity skills, the skills to work in a diverse workforce, to work with each other, because, by the way, hey, we're here, the numbers are here, people are going to have to work together, we're going to have to work together. So I think that's key policy implication. The other thing, and this relates to the next session you're going to hear a little bit about, is encouraging faculty and staff to really develop inclusive practices in the classroom and educational programming. As Enrique said earlier, he said there was total lack of awareness. We don't know what's happening with students. Faculty are not aware that the students can't even get the textbooks in their classes, right? So we need to do whatever we can to increase awareness and then help staff also to work with students to understand those problems and then improve the educational program as a result. One of the things that I've been involved in on this campus and we're doing also across the country is really helping with these dialogues across difference, but also recognizing all kinds of differences, even among Latinos. The other component that I think some campuses are trying to do, and this is certainly happening in the area of sexual harassment and sexual assault, but also in terms of what we're trying to do in terms of diversity, is really increase reporting and investigate promptly. It's very difficult because that is a solution. We need to get better at doing that, but it's very reactive. We need to really think about the educational side. We're proactive. Whatever we do in terms of practice has to be more proactive. So one of the things that we can do is share information about how bias affects student outcomes on campus, right? We have a lot of research in that area, and a lot of research on Latinos has actually informed it. So here are some resources for that brief that we submitted for the Supreme Court. You can actually read it. It's online. You go to harry.ucla, and it's discrimination and bias, underrepresentation and sense of belonging. You can find it if you probably just, if you go to the Harry website, you could probably find it very easily. The other thing is my book, The Magic Key, with Ruth Zambrana and a whole host of other scholars that contributed to this. We helped them to focus their work on Mexican Americans so we can actually come up with some solutions. So the book has a set of solutions that are very important, and there's a website discount. So, and it's pretty cheap on the website, actually, if you go directly to the website. So I just encourage you to do that, and thank you.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. So we will have time for just a few questions for this third panel. If anyone has a question, one or two questions.
Hi, my name is Estela Chavez. I'm a third year in the SSDE program, and my question is for Dr. Hurtado. I'm aware that the DLE survey has a higher percentage of private institutions. Is there a difference between the respondents in public versus private?
The DLE, actually, we started with a piloting in broad access institutions. So we wanted to really, one of the reasons is because a lot of people say, oh, well, if you're broad access, you don't really have any climate problems. And so one of our initial thoughts with this was really, well, if you are diverse, you actually have more work to do because you've got to work with that diversity. You have to figure out what to do with it, right? And so we actually, our initial pilot, so the first 2 or 3 years had broad access institutions involved. We have community colleges involved as well. So it's a little bit of a different sample. The campuses that have been participating since have been both large, public, and private. And I can't remember the breakdown in terms of that right now. I think it's almost half and half public and private. So the diverse learning environment is very different from the other surveys. The other follow-ups, a lot of private colleges want to know what's going on with their students because they're the, that's where the money is. So actually, but we started with a very broad group. And so campuses that participate in the Diverse Learning Environment Survey actually want to know more about how to improve the climate. So if it is biased, it's biased to campuses that have been having problems and they want to figure out ways to solve them, which is where we want to do. We want to work with people who need help. Okay?
Is there maybe one other question for the panel?
Hello, my name is Daphne Reis, and I have a question about the Mariposa Achievement Program. I'm from Fullerton College, which is a community college in Orange County, so I'm repping Orange County. So I'm very interested in this program specifically because in working with undocumented students at the community college level, they've talked to me about wellness and how mental health is a big concern for them. So my question is, at UCLA, because a lot of them are dreaming about transferring to a university such as this, so how do you go about institutionalizing some, that kind of program that helps students with wellness, with mental health? And how could we do that at Fullerton College as well?
Okay. So I did forget to mention something that we had in the past where it talks about mental health and actually addresses mental health, which is like something that was really important to the mission or the goal that we have for the program, right? So it's the collective of immigrant resilience through community led empowerment. It's basically a circle. It's called a circle project. And what this does is it provides a safe space for undocumented students to talk about their identity as immigrant, as undocumented, and all those struggles that they go through, the barriers that they face, or even some of the things that that are important to them to talk about, to be able to address that mental health and be able to just have a space where they can share. Because a lot of the times they've never had an opportunity to even say what's happening in their personal lives, right? And so having this space where we allow them to just come up and have a conversation and dialogue is really important. We did come across a challenge in the last years where the numbers of students showing up to these circles was pretty large in numbers. So a lot of students were coming in, but then we came across a challenge where students were screened. We did a partnership with the counseling and psychological services on campus. And because students were screened before joining the circles, it became a challenge where students weren't accessing the services anymore. So in thinking, how do we address that barrier? For this year in particular, we're looking into just providing a space where we're looking into providing, I guess, rebranding the Circle Project and calling it like a coffee talk, or having a space where we're just gonna be together as a community and be able to talk about these different issues, right? And so be able to, I think it starts with that, just providing that space, even if it's just like that coffee talk, which is something that the new program director for the undocumented student program wants to continue, as she saw this in UC Davis, work in UC Davis, like just having that space and having that, like opening that space will bring students in. And so, yeah, I think, I don't know. I think this is something that you can actually, if you're interested in doing, you can open a space in your campus, reserving a room where students can just join in. Maybe if you do themes, maybe talk about like academics, for example, you can talk about, like, for example, we want to talk about gender issues, we want to talk about mixed status relationships, and we want to talk about queer identity, or how that intersectionalities between identities, and many other topics that you can just incorporate into those talking circles.
Okay, thank you so much to our panelists. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you.